School bullies knocked a teen in a wheelchair, dumping his college applications across the concrete and leaving him bleeding on the ground. The punk quarterback and his crew laugh as they flee, thinking they've gotten away with another cruel attack on a helpless victim. But 30 minutes later, the stocky man in the gray tracksuit walking through those school doors isn't just another visitor. This is Mike Tyson himself. The bullies have no idea they just assaulted a disabled kid in front of the former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, a man who spent decades destroying opponents with his bare hands. While the cowardly punks return to football practice, the boxing legend approaches with that deadly calm that once terrorized grown men in the ring. The quarterback still thinks his daddy's money and school connections make him untouchable, but he's about to learn why they called this man the baddest man on the planet. The coach and team watch in stunned silence as the most feared fighter in history offers the bully a choice: apologize and serve the community, or step into the ring with a living legend. What happens when entitled punks meet old-school justice? Will the quarterback survive 3 minutes with Iron Mike? What happened next would haunt the bully's nightmares for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Danny Castellano wheeled through Riverside High's bustling courtyard, his backpack heavy with college application materials that represented 2 years of careful planning. The October afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete as students streamed past, some nodding respectfully at the sharp-witted junior who'd earned their admiration through his fearless newspaper editorials. At T16, Danny had learned to navigate more than just the physical obstacles of his wheelchair. He'd mastered the art of moving through crowds, timing his routes, and maintaining the dignity that came naturally to someone who refused to be defined by spina bifida. Today felt different, though. Hopeful. His early admission application to Columbia's journalism program was nearly complete, and he was excited to review the final details with his guidance counselor. As he approached the main building, 3 figures stepped into view near the accessible ramp. Danny's stomach tightened. Chad Brennan stood in the center, his quarterback's cocky smile already forming. Kyle Maddox flanked him to the right, always eager to earn his captain's approval. Derek Walsh loomed on the left, all muscle and limited thinking, but intimidating. Enough to make most students cross the hall. They weren't there by accident. Danny could see it in their positioning, the way they deliberately blocked his path. Chad's expensive Letterman jacket caught the sunlight as he crossed his arms, blue, eyes cold with something that went beyond typical teenage cruelty. Well, Chad said, his voice carrying that entitled tone Danny had heard echoing through the halls for 3 years. Look what rolled up. The courtyard continued its normal rhythm around them, but Danny felt the invisible circle forming. As other students sensed drama brewing, some slowed their pace, phones already emerging from pockets. Others quickened their steps, not wanting to become collateral damage in whatever Chad had planned. Danny kept his expression calm, even as his heart rate picked up. He'd learned long ago that showing fear only fed bullies like Chad. His hands remained steady on his wheelchair's rims, ready to maneuver if an escape route appeared. Kyle and Derek spread out slightly, cutting off his potential exits with the casual efficiency of predators who'd done this before. The accessible ramp behind them might as well have been a mountain. Afternoon, Chad, Danny said, keeping his voice level. Blocking handicap access now? That's a new low even for you. Chad's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. Oh, I think we need to have a little chat first, Castellano. About that interesting piece you wrote last week. Danny's stomach dropped. His editorial on toxic masculinity in high school athletics had run in Friday's paper. He'd known it would ruffle feathers, but he'd written it anyway. Truth mattered, more than comfort. Now Chad stepped directly into his path, forcing Danny's wheelchair to stop completely. Chad leaned against Danny's wheelchair handles, bringing his face uncomfortably close. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with arrogance filled the small space between them. You know, Castellano, I've been thinking about that editorial you wrote. The one about toxic masculinity in high school athletics. Chad's voice dripped, with mock thoughtfulness. Funny how someone who can't even stand up thinks he can criticize real men. The words hit like physical blows, but Danny had armor built from years of facing ignorance. Around them, more students gathered, some recording with their phones. The courtyard's normal chatter quieted as word spread that Chad Brennan was targeting the wheelchair kid again. Must be nice, Chad continued, writing about athletic achievement from the sidelines. Tell me, what do you know about pushing your body to its limits? Danny felt the familiar fire kindle in his chest. His father had taught him before cancer. Took him away that intelligence was the greatest equalizer. At least I use my brain for something other than a battering ram, he replied, his voice steady and clear. Though I guess when you're failing 3 classes, physical intimidation is really all you have left. Kyle snickered nervously, but the sound died when Chad's face flushed red. Several students in the growing crowd shifted uncomfortably. Danny had just done what none of them dared. He publicly called out the untouchable quarterback. You think you're so smart. Chad's control began to slip. His hands clenched into fists as he stared down at Danny. Let's see how smart you are when your precious college applications are blowing in the wind. Before Danny could react, Chad grabbed his backpack and yanked it from the wheelchair's storage pouch. Papers scattered everywhere. Recommendation. Letters, essay drafts, scholarship applications. 2 years of careful preparation spread across the dirty courtyard like fallen leaves. Oops, Chad said with mock concern. Hope those weren't important. Danny watched his dreams literally scattered in the wind. His Columbia application essay drifted toward a puddle while his carefully organized transcripts mixed with lunch trash. But instead of breaking, something harder crystallized inside him. You know what your problem is, Chad? Danny's voice carried clearly across the now silent courtyard. You're so insecure about your own worthlessness that you have to attack people who can't fight back. It's pathetic, really. Your daddy's money might buy you grades and keep you out of trouble, but it can't buy you the one thing you'll never have, respect. The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, holy crap, he actually said it. Chad's face went from red to purple. Kyle and Derek looked to their leader, waiting for direction as students continued recording that Chad's composure shattered. Completely. You think you're so smart? Let's see how smart you are on the ground. His hand shot out, shoving Danny's wheelchair hard. The chair tipped backward, and Danny felt the sickening sensation of falling. Danny's wheelchair crashed to the concrete. With a sickening metallic clang, his head struck the pavement hard, sending stars exploding across his vision. The taste of copper filled his mouth as warm liquid trickled down his forehead. The courtyard erupted. Students screamed, some rushing forward while others backed away in shock. Chad, Kyle, and Derek fled immediately, their footsteps echoing off the building walls as they disappeared around the corner toward the athletic fields. Oh my God, Danny! Melissa Rodriguez dropped to her knees beside him, her student government folder scattering as she fumbled for her phone. Somebody call 911. Now, Mrs. Patricia Kowalski pushed through the crowd with the authority of 20 years in education. Everyone step back. Give him space. She knelt beside Danny, her experienced eyes checking his pupils while keeping his head still. Don't move. Honey, help is coming. Danny blinked hard, trying to focus. The world felt tilted, like everything was happening underwater. His college papers continued to blow across the courtyard, some already trampled by curious feet. 2 years of work, scattered and ruined. The applications, he mumbled, trying to sit up. Forget the papers, Mrs. Kowalski said firmly, gently restraining him. You might have a concussion. Stay still. Around them, phones appeared everywhere. Students recorded from multiple angles, some already posting to social media. Within minutes, hashtags began forming. Hashtag Riverside High, hashtag bullying, hashtag justice for Danny. The video of Chad shoving Danny's wheelchair started spreading beyond the school's walls. This is so messed up, someone muttered from the crowd. Chad's finally gone too far, another voice added. Melissa held Danny's hand while talking rapidly to the 911 dispatcher. Riverside High School, yes. A student was attacked. He's in a wheelchair and hit his head hard when he fell. There's blood. Mrs. Kowalski gathered what papers she could reach without leaving Danny's side. Her face was grim with determination as she watched the videos being recorded. Make sure you get good footage, she told one student quietly. This time there needs to be evidence. Danny's vision began to clear, but his head pounded with each heartbeat. The humiliation hurt almost as much as the physical pain. He'd been reduced to helplessness in front of half the school, his dignity stripped away along with his scattered dreams. Mrs. K, he whispered, My mom's going to be so upset. Your mother's going to be proud of how brave you were, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Standing up to bullies takes real courage, Danny. Don't you ever forget that. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. But 30 miles away, in a community center meeting room, a boxing legend was checking his phone and seeing videos. That would change everything. Mike Tyson watched the footage 3 times, his jaw tightening with each viewing. The attack triggered memories of his own childhood, being bullied for his lisp, his size, his poverty. But more than that, it violated his core belief that real strength protects the weak. He told his driver, "Change of plans. We're going to Riverside High." Mike Tyson sat in his black Escalade outside the Community Youth Center in Allentown, where he'd just finished discussing funding for an at-risk youth boxing program. The meeting had gone well, another chance to give kids the guidance he'd never had growing up. His phone buzzed with a text from his manager. "You need to see this." The link opened to a video that made his blood run cold. A teenager in a wheelchair, papers scattered around him, blood trickling from his head. 3 bullies fleeing like cowards after attacking someone who couldn't fight back on equal terms. Mike watched the footage again, then a 3rd time. Each viewing made his jaw tighter. The punk quarterback's arrogant smile before the attack. The way the kid in the wheelchair kept his dignity even while being humiliated. The scattered college applications that represented someone's dreams. This wasn't just bullying. This was everything Mike had fought against his entire life. "Where's Riverside High?" he asked his driver. "About 25 minutes east." "Why?" "Because some punk just attacked a kid in a wheelchair, and that ain't happening on my watch." As the Escalade pulled onto Route 22, Mike made calls. He gathered information about the school, the students involved, and the injured boy's condition. With each detail, his resolve hardened. He'd spent 50 years learning that real strength wasn't about intimidating people. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The memories came flooding back. Being small and scared, having a lisp that made bigger kids laugh, growing up in neighborhoods where might made right. He'd learned to fight because he had to, but more importantly, he'd learned what fighting was really for. His phone rang. More videos were surfacing from different angles. The attack was going viral, but Mike wasn't interested in social media justice. He believed in the kind of justice that looked bullies in the eye and made them remember why respect mattered. 25 minutes later, the Escalade pulled into Riverside High's parking lot just as the final bell rang. Students poured out of the building, many still talking about the incident. Some were watching the videos on their phones, others gathering in excited clusters. Mike stepped out wearing a simple gray tracksuit and gold chains. His presence immediately commanded attention without him saying a word. Students did double takes, whispering among themselves as recognition slowly dawned that a nervous sophomore approached. "Excuse me, sir, are you?" Mike nodded with a slight smile. "Yeah, kid. You know where I can find the boy who got hurt?" The student's eyes widened. "You're really him. You're actually Mike Tyson." "That's right. Now, about that boy." Word spread like wildfire through the crowd. The legendary heavyweight champion was here, asking about Danny Castellano. Students pointed toward the main building, some following. At a respectful distance, as Mike walked with the quiet purpose of a man on a mission, he moved through the hallways like he belonged there, his reputation preceding him. Teachers and students stopped to stare, some taking pictures. But Mike remained focused on one thing: finding the kid who'd been hurt and making sure the cowards who hurt him understood what real strength looked like. The nurse's office was just ahead, and through the glass window, Mike could see him, the teenager from the video, head bandaged, looking small and vulnerable in his wheelchair. Mike's expression hardened with resolve as he gently knocked on the door. Mike entered the nurse's office where Danny sat with an ice pack pressed against his head, Melissa beside him holding his hand, and Nurse Betty Sullivan checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. "Excuse me," Mike said softly, his distinctive voice immediately recognizable. "I heard what happened to you, young man." Danny looked up, squinting through his concussion haze. His eyes widened as recognition dawned. You're Mike Tyson." Mike pulled up a chair and sat at Danny's eye level, his presence filling the small room without overwhelming it. "That's right, champion. And I saw what those cowards did to you." Melissa's mouth fell open. Nurse Sullivan paused her examination, starstruck but trying to maintain professionalism. Danny, despite his injury, straightened slightly in his wheelchair. "Why are you here?" Danny asked, his journalist's instincts cutting through the pain and confusion. Mike's expression grew serious. "Because what I saw on that video reminded me of something I learned a long time ago. You know what real strength is? It's using your power to protect people who can't protect themselves. What happened to you today? That wasn't strength, that was weakness disguised as power." Danny studied Mike's face, seeing something beyond the legend. "You were bullied too, weren't you?" "Every day until I learned to fight back." "But fighting back don't always mean throwing punches. Sometimes it means standing up with words, like you did. Takes more guts to face down a bully with nothing but your courage." "Lot of good it did me," Danny said bitterly, gesturing toward the bandage on his head. Mike leaned forward. "You think this is over? Son, this is just the beginning. Those punks think they won something today, but they just picked a fight with the wrong person. I'm not exactly intimidating from down here," Danny said with a weak smile. "You got it. Backwards, champ. You don't need to intimidate anybody. You got something they'll never have, character. That's why they're scared of you. That's why they had to knock you down." Mike's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "But now they got to deal with me." Nurse Sullivan cleared her throat. "Mr. Tyson, Danny has a mild concussion, but he's stable. His mother is on her way from the hospital where she works." Mike nodded, then turned back to Danny. "Your mama raised a warrior. Don't let anybody tell you different." He stood, his face set with determination that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. "Danny, I want you to know something. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." He headed for the door, then paused. "Nurse Sullivan, where would I find the football team right now?" "Practice field, behind the school," she answered automatically, then realized what she'd just said. Mike smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Perfect." Mike strode across the campus toward the football field, students trailing behind at a respectful distance with phones recording his every step. Word traveled faster than he walked. Mike Tyson was at Riverside High, and he looked like a man with a purpose. The football team was running drills when Mike appeared at the edge of the field. One by one, players noticed the stocky figure in the gray tracksuit and stopped what they were doing. The legend's presence was unmistakable. The way he carried himself, the controlled power in every movement. Coach Walter Kowalski looked up from his clipboard and froze. 20 years in the Marines had taught him to recognize real warriors, and Mike Tyson radiated the kind of authority that couldn't be faked. "Coach Kowalski." Mike approached with his hand extended. "I'm Mike Tyson. I know who you are, sir." Walt shook the offered hand, noting the iron grip. "What brings you to my practice?" "I'm here about what 3 of your players did to a kid in a wheelchair about an hour ago." Walt's expression darkened. He'd been in meetings all afternoon and hadn't heard about any incident. "What happened?" "They attacked a disabled student, knocked him out of his chair, and left him bleeding on the concrete." "I saw the video." The coach's jaw tightened. Walt had spent his career trying to instill discipline and character in young men, fighting against the toxic culture that produced behavior like this. "Which players?" "Chad Brennan, Kyle Maddox, and Derek Walsh." "Damn it." Walt's face flushed with anger and disappointment. He'd suspected Chad was trouble, but the boy's father's influence had made discipline difficult. "I wasn't aware of this incident, Mr. Tyson, but I can promise you, I ain't here to listen to promises, coach. I respect what you're trying to do here, but those boys crossed a line that can't be uncrossed with detention and lapse." Walt studied Mike's face and recognized something familiar. The look of a man who'd seen enough injustice and decided to do something about it. "What do you want to do?" "I want to have a conversation with them. Man to man." The coach nodded slowly. Despite the potential complications, he knew Mike was right. Some lessons couldn't be taught from a textbook. Brennan, Maddox, Walsh, front and center. The 3 boys jogged over, their earlier bravado evaporating as they realized who was standing next to their coach. Chad tried to maintain his swagger, but his face had gone pale. Kyle and Derek hung back, suddenly very interested in their cleats. Mike looked at each of them in turn, his gaze measuring and finding them wanting. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried an edge that made grown men nervous. "I understand you boys like picking on people who can't fight back. That's an interesting choice." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Other players had gathered in a loose circle, sensing something significant was about to happen. "We didn't do nothing wrong," Chad said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Mike smiled. but it didn't reach his eyes. Is that right? So you didn't push a kid in a wheelchair and leave him bleeding on the ground? That cripple had it coming, Chad blurted, then immediately realized his mistake. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Mike's smile disappeared completely. Mike stepped closer to Chad, his movement fluid and controlled. The teenager suddenly looked very young and very small. What did you just call him? Mike's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the silent field like thunder. Chad swallowed hard, realizing he'd made a fatal error. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Mike's eyes never left Chad's face. You meant exactly what you said. That's your problem. You think being cruel makes you strong. But I got news for you, son. Real men don't attack people who can't defend themselves. Coach Kowalski watched with grim satisfaction. He'd tried for 3 years to teach Chad this lesson through conventional means. Maybe it would take an unconventional teacher. Now, I'm going to give you boys a choice, Mike continued, his voice returning to normal volume, but losing none of its intensity. You can march yourselves back to that school, apologize publicly to Danny Castellano, and commit to 100 hours of community service helping disabled children. Or, he paused, letting the word hang in the air. Or what? Chad asked, some of his arrogance returning now that he was surrounded by his teammates. Or you can step into the ring with me. Right here, right now. Man to man. The football field fell dead silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Chad looked around at his teammates, seeing a mixture of fear and anticipation in their faces. Kyle and Derek immediately stepped forward. We'll take the community service, Kyle said quickly. Good choice, Mike nodded approvingly. Smart boys. But Chad's teenage pride and years of protection from consequences kicked in. His father's money had always bought him out of trouble. His athletic status had always made him untouchable. He couldn't back down now, not in front of everyone. I ain't apologizing to that cripple, Chad said, his voice gaining strength from his own stupidity. And I ain't afraid of some old has-been. A collective intake of breath from the watching players. Even Kyle and Derek looked at their leader with horror. Mike tilted his head slightly, studying Chad like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Some old has-been, huh? That's right. You're what, 60? I'm 17, 6'2", 195. I lift every day. You probably can't even touch your toes anymore. Mike began removing his tracksuit jacket, revealing the still powerful physique underneath. Tell you what, son. Let's find out. Coach Kowalski stepped forward. Mr. Tyson, I can't let you fight a student on school property. The liability, this ain't a fight, Coach, Mike said calmly, handing him the jacket. This is an education. Chad stripped off his jersey, revealing his muscular frame. At 6'2" and 195 pounds of young muscle, he looked formidable. But standing across from Mike Tyson, he suddenly seemed like exactly what he was, an overgrown boy about to learn a very hard lesson. You sure about this, Chad? Coach Kowalski asked one last time. Come on, old man, Chad taunted, bouncing on his feet. Let's see what you got. Mike's response was quiet and matter-of-fact. You're about to find out why they called me the baddest man on the planet. The entire football team formed a loose circle around the two fighters. Phones appeared everywhere as players recorded what they instinctively knew would be historic footage. Chad bounced on his feet, throwing a few practice punches to show off his reach and speed. Mike stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, watching. Chad with the patience of a predator who knew the outcome was inevitable. Anytime you're ready, Grandpa, Chad taunted, dancing around Mike's stationary form. Chad threw the first punch, a wild haymaker aimed at Mike's head. Mike tilted his body slightly, and the punch whistled harmlessly past his ear. Chad stumbled forward from his own momentum, off balance and confused. That's one, Mike said calmly. Chad regrouped and came again, this time throwing a combination, left jab, right cross. Mike slipped both punches with minimal movement, his head weaving. Like smoke. Chad's fists found only air. That's 3 and 4. Frustrated, Chad charged forward, trying to use his size and youth to overwhelm the older man. Mike stepped inside Chad's reach and delivered a lightning-fast body shot to the ribs, not hard enough to seriously injure, but precise enough to steal the teenager's breath. Chad gasped and staggered backward, his hands dropping to his sides as he fought for air. The watching players murmured in amazement. None of them had even seen Mike's punch. You felt that, didn't you? Mike asked conversationally. That's what helplessness feels like. That's what you made Danny feel, except he couldn't fight back. Chad straightened up, his face red with embarrassment and rage. Get lucky punch. Old man, I'm just getting warmed up. He came again, this time more cautiously, but still driven by teenage pride and the certainty that his youth and size had to count for something. Mike let him throw several more punches, slipping each one with an economy of movement that was almost hypnotic to watch. Then Mike countered with a perfect combination. A feint to draw Chad's guard up, followed by two precise body shots that dropped the teenager to his knees. Gasping for breath, Chad knelt on the grass, his hands on his thighs, struggling to breathe. The invincible quarterback looked very small and very young. Mike knelt beside him and spoke quietly, his voice carrying to every person on the field. You know what the difference is between you and me, son? I learned that real strength ain't about hurting people. It's about protecting them. You just got a taste of what it feels like to be helpless. Remember that feeling next time you think about picking on someone who can't defend themselves. Chad nodded weakly, all his arrogance gone. Mike helped him to his feet with surprising gentleness. You're young. You can learn from this, or you can keep being a coward. Choice is yours. The field remained silent except for Chad's labored breathing. Then, cutting through the quiet like a siren, came the sound of car doors slamming. Principal Earl Morrison approached with Detective Frank Ricci, both men looking grim. Mr. Tyson, Morrison called out, his voice tight with authority and barely controlled anger. You've just assaulted a minor on school property. Mike turned slowly, his expression calm. I gave him a choice. He made it. Detective Ricci approached, with obvious reluctance, handcuffs already in his hands. I'm sorry, Mr. Tyson, but I have to place you under arrest for assault. As the cuffs clicked into place, a black BMW pulled into the parking lot with squealing tires. The driver's door flew open, and Robert Big Bob Brennan stepped out, his face purple with rage. Mike looked directly at Chad one more time. Remember what we talked about, son. Real men protect people, they don't hurt them. The legend was led away in handcuffs, but his message had been delivered with devastating clarity. Big Bob Brennan emerged from his black BMW like a force of nature, 6'2", 280 pounds of barely controlled rage stuffed into a $1,000 suit. His thinning gray hair was perfectly styled. His gold watch caught the afternoon light, but his cold blue eyes burned with the fury of a man whose empire had been challenged. Detective Ricci. Big Bob's voice boomed across the football field. I want this man charged to the fullest extent of the law. He assaulted my son. Mike stood calmly in handcuffs, watching the display of wealth and influence with the detached interest of someone who'd seen this performance before. Detective Ricci looked uncomfortable, clearly caught between doing what was right and following orders from powerful people. Mr. Brennan, Ricci said carefully, your son did attack that disabled student earlier today. Mr. Tyson was, I don't care what my son allegedly did, Big Bob interrupted, his face reddening. This convicted felon just assaulted a minor on school property in front of witnesses. If you don't arrest him immediately, I'll have your badge. Principal Morrison stepped forward, his nervous energy matching his rumpled appearance. The district has a zero-tolerance policy for violence on school grounds. Mr. Tyson must face consequences. Mike studied Morrison with growing understanding. The principal's concern wasn't about justice or student safety. It was about protecting the school's image and his own position. Morrison kept glancing at Big Bob like a dog seeking approval from its master. Interesting, Mike said quietly. Real interesting how nobody was worried about zero tolerance when your boy was attacking a kid in a wheelchair. That's different, Morrison said quickly. That was a student disciplinary matter. This is an adult assaulting a child. Child. Mike's voice carried a hint of his old, dangerous edge. That child just tried to beat up a grown man. Funny how he's suddenly a helpless victim when he's the one on the ground. Big Bob stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening rumble. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a washed-up fighter who doesn't know when to quit. Let me explain how this works. I own this town. I fund this school. My company builds half the projects in this county. You just made an enemy you can't afford to have. Mike met Big Bob's stare without flinching. I know exactly what you are, Mr. Brennan. I've dealt with bullies my whole life. The only difference between you and your boy is you wear a better suit. Detective Ricci cleared his throat, his discomfort obvious. Mr. Tyson, I need to process you downtown. You have the right to remain silent. As Ricci recited the Miranda rights, Big Bob made several phone calls. His conversations were brief and pointed, mentions of campaign contributions, construction contracts, and political favors. The corruption wasn't even subtle. I want him charged with felony assault, Big Bob told someone on the phone. Use whatever influence you have with the DA's office. This ends today. Mike was led toward the police car, but he caught sight of Danny and Carol Castellano arriving at the school. Through the crowd of students and faculty, Mike made eye contact with the teenager. He nodded once, a promise that this wasn't over. You made a big mistake today, Big Bob called after him. You should have minded your own business. Mike paused at the patrol car door. Mr. Brennan, I've been making the same mistake my whole life, standing up to cowards who pick on people who can't defend themselves. I ain't stopping now. 3 hours later, Mike walked out of the county lockup into a media circus. News vans lined the street, reporters shouted questions, and camera flashes lit up the evening sky. His attorney had arranged bail, but the damage was already spreading across social media like wildfire. Hashtag Justice for Danny was trending nationally. The video of Chad's attack had been viewed millions of times, but now it was joined by footage of Mike's fight with the quarterback. The narrative was shifting and not in Mike's favor. Mr. Tyson, a reporter thrust a microphone toward him. Do you regret attacking that student? Mike paused at his Escalade. A kid was hurt today for standing up to bullies. If that's not worth fighting for, I don't know what is. He drove away without answering more questions, but the damage was already done. Big Bob's influence was working its dark magic through the system. Meanwhile, at Riverside High, Danny sat in Principal Morrison's office with his mother Carol beside him. The small, sterile room felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Morrison shuffled papers with nervous energy, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Daniel, I'm afraid we have no choice but to suspend you for the remainder of the week. Suspend him. Carol's voice rose in disbelief. He's the victim here. Mrs. Castellano, your son's inflammatory journalism provoked this incident. His editorial about our athletics program created a hostile environment that led directly to today's confrontation. Danny stared at Morrison in amazement. So I'm being punished for telling the truth. You're being held accountable for your actions, Morrison replied stiffly. Furthermore, effective immediately, all students are prohibited from posting about this incident on social media. Any violations will result in immediate expulsion. Carol stood up, her nurse's training helping her stay calm despite her fury. You're covering this up. You're protecting those boys and punishing my son for being attacked. Morrison's response was cold and bureaucratic. The district has procedures for handling these situations. I suggest you focus on your son's recovery rather than making accusations. Outside the office, Mrs. Patricia Kowalski waited with barely controlled anger. She tried to speak with Morrison about the obvious injustice, but he'd threatened her with termination if she didn't fall in line with district policy. This is wrong, Patricia, she told her husband Walt that evening. That boy is being punished for having the courage to stand up to bullies. Walt's military bearing couldn't hide his disgust. I know, but Morrison's got his orders from higher up. Big Bob Brennan owns half the school board. As evening fell, Danny sat in his bedroom staring at his damaged college applications. The papers Mike's supporters had collected were wrinkled and torn, some missing entirely. His suspension had jeopardized his early admission chances to Columbia. A knock at the front door interrupted his despair. Carol's voice carried from downstairs. Danny, there's someone here to see you. Mike Tyson stood in their modest living room, having driven straight from the police station to keep his promise. How you holding up, champ? Mike asked, settling into a chair that seemed too small for his frame. They suspended me, Danny said bitterly, for being attacked. My college applications are ruined, and now I'm the bad guy. Mike's jaw tightened. That's how corruption works, son. They flip the script, make the victim the villain. But this ain't over. Not by a long shot. Carol served coffee with shaking hands, not from fear of Mike, but from anger at the system. I don't understand how this is happening. Danny was hurt, and somehow he's the one being punished. Because powerful people are scared, Mike replied. Your boy hit too close to the truth, and now they're trying to silence him. Danny looked up with renewed hope. What can we do? Mike's smile was grim but determined. We're going to expose all of it. The bullying, the corruption, the cover-up. Everything. Mike listened intently as Carol explained their history with the school system, years of fighting for basic accommodations, dealing with bureaucratic indifference, and watching her brilliant son face constant obstacles that other students never encountered. Danny's not asking for special treatment, Carol said, her voice tight with frustration. He just wants the same opportunities as everyone else. But every step forward has been a battle. Danny shared his passion for investigative journalism and his growing suspicion that Riverside High's problems ran deeper than simple bullying. I've been documenting incidents for months. Chad's attacked other students before, but it always gets covered up. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Melissa Rodriguez stood on the porch, clutching a manila folder and looking nervous. Melissa? Danny's face brightened at seeing his best friend. I found something, she said, glancing around before entering. Something big. Mike gestured for her to sit. What kind of something? Melissa opened her folder, revealing financial documents and school board minutes. As student body treasurer, I have access to budget reports. Look at these construction contracts. She spread the papers across the coffee table. Big Bob's company has been billing the district for accessibility improvements that were never completed. This broken pavement where Danny's wheelchair got stuck, it was supposed to be fixed 2 years ago with federal accessibility funds. Mike's expression darkened as he studied the documents. How much money are we talking about? Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 5 years. And look at this. Melissa pointed to another document. Morrison approved every inflated invoice without question. Carol gasped. They stole money meant to help disabled students. It gets worse, Melissa continued. I found incident reports that were buried. Chad hospitalized a special needs student named Marcus Williams last year. The family wanted to press charges, but Morrison convinced them it was just a teenage prank gone wrong. Danny's hands clenched into fists. They've been covering for him all along. Another knock at the door brought Mrs. Patricia Kowalski, who looked exhausted and defeated. I hope you don't mind me coming by, she said to Carol. I needed to see how Danny was doing. Mrs. K. Danny's face lit up despite everything. I was placed on administrative leave, she said quietly. Apparently, asking questions about the district's handling of this situation makes me a disruptive influence. Mike stood up, his jaw set with determination. That's it. This is bigger than bullying. This is about a corrupt system that punishes victims and protects predators. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. Linda? It's Mike Tyson. I need you in Pennsylvania tomorrow. We've got a civil rights case that's going to make national news. Patricia looked confused. Who's Linda? Linda Martinez, Mike explained between calls. Best civil rights attorney on the East Coast. And she owes me a favor. He made another call. Dr. Washington? Mike Tyson. Remember that conversation we had about systemic discrimination? I've got a case study for you. Danny watched in amazement as Mike mobilized resources with the efficiency of a military operation. Dr. James Washington, Mike explained. Disability rights advocate. If there's a federal case here, he'll find it. Carol broke down, the weight of years of struggle finally overwhelming her. I felt so helpless watching Danny face these barriers. Every day, I work 2 jobs, I fight the system, but nothing ever changes. Mike knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Castellano, you raised a warrior. Danny's got more courage in his little finger than most grown men have in their whole bodies. And now he's not fighting alone. He stood and addressed the room. Tomorrow we go public with everything we've found. We shine a light so bright on this corruption that the cockroaches have nowhere to hide. Melissa clutched her folder of evidence. What if they try to silence us? Mike's smile was cold and determined. Let them try. I've been dealing with bullies my whole life. The only difference between Big Bob Brennan and the punks I grew up with is the size of his bank account. But money can't buy you honor, and it can't protect you from the truth. The next morning, Mike arrived at the Castellano home with reinforcements. Linda Martinez stepped out of a rental car, her sharp business suit and silver-streaked hair projecting authority and competence. Behind her came Dr. James Washington, a distinguished African-American man whose reputation in disability rights preceded him. Mrs. Castellano, Danny, Linda said, shaking hands with practiced warmth. I've reviewed the preliminary information Mike sent me. What happened to your son isn't just bullying. It's a systematic violation of his civil rights. Dr. Washington nodded gravely. The financial evidence suggests a pattern of discrimination funded by theft of federal accessibility funds. This could trigger multiple federal investigations. Mike watched Danny's face transform as he realized the magnitude of support suddenly available to him. You really think we can win? We're not just going to win, Linda said firmly. We're going to change the system so this can't happen to other families. They spread documents across the Castellanos' kitchen table, building a comprehensive case. Linda explained their legal strategy, civil rights violations, educational malpractice, and federal fraud charges. The financial corruption gave them leverage against the entire school board. The beauty of this case, Dr. Washington added, is that it combines individual justice with systemic reform. Danny's story becomes a catalyst for protecting other disabled students nationwide. Mike revealed more of his personal journey, talking about how his troubled past had taught him the importance of standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. I see something in Danny that reminds me of who I wished someone had protected when I was young. Carol listened with growing amazement as these accomplished professionals discussed strategy with the same intensity as generals planning a campaign. I can't believe you're all here because of what happened to Danny. Your son is special, Dr. Washington said. His courage in standing up to systematic oppression, his intelligence in documenting the corruption, his refusal to be silenced. These qualities make him a powerful advocate for change. Linda outlined their media strategy. Mike's celebrity status will ensure widespread coverage, but the focus needs to remain on the issues: discrimination, corruption, and institutional failure. They discussed the press conference planned for the county courthouse steps. Danny would speak about his experience. Linda would present the legal evidence, and Dr. Washington would address the broader implications for disabled students everywhere. The key, Mike emphasized, is to make this bigger than just one incident. We're exposing a system that's been failing kids for years. Carol's composure finally cracked. Years of fighting alone, of feeling powerless against bureaucratic indifference, of watching her son face barriers that shouldn't exist, it all came pouring out. I've tried so hard to give Danny every opportunity, she sobbed. I work double shifts to pay for his equipment and treatments. I fight the school system for basic accommodations. I watch him excel academically while facing discrimination every day. And when he finally stands up for himself, they punish him for it. Mike placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Castellano, you did everything right. You raised a son who has the courage to speak truth to power. That's not easy in any circumstances, but doing it from a wheelchair takes something special. Linda added, what you've both endured is going to help us protect countless other families. Your struggle wasn't in vain. Dr. Washington leaned forward. Tomorrow, we make sure Danny's voice is heard not just in this community, but across the nation. His story becomes a rallying cry for justice. Mike stood up, his expression resolute. Tomorrow we ring the bell that can't be unrung. Once we expose this corruption publicly, there's no going back. Everyone ready for that fight. Danny straightened in his wheelchair, his journalist's instincts and inherited courage shining in his eyes. I've been ready my whole life. The team shook hands, each knowing they were about to engage in a battle that would define not just Danny's future, but the future of countless students facing similar challenges. Outside, Big Bob Brennan was making his own plans, unaware that his empire was about to face its greatest challenge. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. on the county courthouse steps. Local and national media had gathered, drawn by the combination of Mike Tyson's involvement and the compelling story of a disabled student fighting institutional corruption. Danny sat beside Mike at the podium, his head bandages still visible, looking determined despite his nervousness. Behind them stood Linda Martinez and Dr. Washington, their presence lending gravitas to the proceedings. Mike stepped to the microphone first, his distinctive voice carrying clearly across the crowd of reporters and supporters who had gathered. I want to talk to you about the difference between strength and bullying. Real strength isn't about making people afraid of you. It's about making people feel safe around you. He paused, letting the words sink in. 3 days ago, a 16-year-old honor student was attacked at his school for having the courage to write about injustice. He was knocked from his wheelchair and left bleeding on the concrete. Not because he threatened anyone, not because he was violent, but because he told the truth. The crowd murmured as Mike's voice gained intensity. That boy showed more courage in one moment than most grown men show in their entire lives. And how was he rewarded? He was suspended, punished for being a victim. That's not justice. That's corruption. Linda Martinez presented the evidence of financial fraud with prosecutorial precision. She detailed Big Bob's construction company overcharging the district for accessibility improvements that were never completed, the federal funds that disappeared into private pockets, and Morrison's role in covering up systematic discrimination. This isn't just about bullying, Linda explained. This is about a corrupt system that steals money meant to help disabled students and then punishes those students when they speak out about mistreatment. Dr. Washington spoke about the broader implications, connecting Danny's experience to nationwide patterns of discrimination against disabled students. His expertise lent academic weight to their arguments. Then Danny wheeled forward to the microphone. Despite his youth and recent trauma, his voice was strong and clear. I'm not asking for sympathy because I'm in a wheelchair. I'm demanding justice because I'm a student who was attacked for telling the truth. His words were articulate and passionate, impressing everyone present. If we don't stand up to bullies and corruption now, if we let them silence voices that speak for justice, then we're telling every disabled student in America that their rights don't matter. The story exploded across social media within minutes. Hashtag Justice for Danny began trending worldwide, with celebrities and politicians expressing support. The state attorney general announced an investigation into the school district's finances. CNN picked up the story for their evening broadcast. The Washington Post assigned a reporter to follow developments. Social media influencers with millions of followers began sharing Danny's story. The pressure was immediate and intense. Within hours, 3 school board members publicly demanded Morrison's resignation and Chad's expulsion. The superintendent promised a complete review of district policies. Mike watched the media coverage from a local diner where the team had gathered to celebrate. For the first time since the attack, Danny was smiling genuinely. "We did it," Danny said, hardly believing the transformation. "People are actually listening." Mike nodded, but his street instincts kept him alert. "This is just round 1, champ. The real fight is just beginning." 1 week later, the pressure campaign appeared to be working beyond their wildest expectations. Principal Morrison called an emergency assembly at Riverside High, with local media present to document the school's commitment to justice and inclusion. Danny returned to school to find himself treated like a celebrity. Students who had previously walked past without acknowledgement now stopped to shake his hand and express support. Teachers went out of their way to praise his courage. Morrison took the stage with the uncomfortable smile of a politician forced to eat his words. Today, Riverside High demonstrates our unwavering commitment to student safety and inclusion, he announced. Effective immediately, Daniel Castellano's suspension is lifted with full academic honors restored. The crowd applauded as Danny was invited onto the stage. Morrison presented him with a Special Achievement Award and announced the establishment of the Castellano Anti-Bullying Initiative, complete with new policies and procedures. Chad, Kyle, and Derek were suspended pending a full investigation. The football team's playoff eligibility was under review. Morrison promised that no student would ever again face retaliation for reporting discrimination or abuse. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Local news portrayed it as a feel-good story of justice prevailing over corruption. Danny's college prospects weren't just restored. Several universities were actively recruiting him after seeing the national coverage. "You see," Morrison said privately to Danny after the assembly, "the system works when we all work together. Sometimes these situations just need time to resolve properly." That evening, Mike joined the Castellano family for dinner to celebrate. Carol had prepared a special meal, and for the first time in months, the house felt filled with hope instead of anxiety. "I can't believe how fast things changed," Danny said, reviewing emails from college admissions offices. "Columbia wants to interview me for their journalism program. The Washington Post is offering a summer internship." Melissa arrived with more good news. The FBI is opening a formal investigation into the construction contracts. Big Bob's company is under federal scrutiny. Mike smiled and congratulated everyone, but his expression remained cautious. Something felt wrong. Big Bob Brennan had been too quiet, and in Mike's experience, when powerful people gave you what you wanted too easily, it usually meant they were planning something worse. Stay alert, champ, he warned Danny quietly as they finished dessert. This feels like the calm before the storm. Mrs. Kowalski called with news that she was being reinstated with a promotion to assistant principal. Coach Kowalski reported that team discipline was improving dramatically without Chad's toxic influence. The celebration continued late into the evening, with supporters calling to congratulate Danny on his victory. National disability rights organizations were praising his courage. A major publisher had inquired about book rights to his story. As Mike prepared to leave, Danny grabbed his hand. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. You always had the courage, son. You just needed someone to help you find your voice." But as Mike drove back to his hotel, unease gnawed at him. Big Bob Brennan wasn't the type to surrender without a fight. Men like him didn't accept defeat. They regrouped and struck back harder. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Ricci. "Watch your back. Powerful people are very unhappy with recent developments." Mike's jaw tightened. The real battle was about to begin. 2 days later, Mike's fears proved prophetic when Linda Martinez called at dawn with urgency in her voice. "Mike, we have a problem. A big one. The DA is filing felony assault charges against you, and it gets worse from there." Mike sat up in his hotel bed, instantly alert. "How much worse?" "Big Bob's using every connection he has. You're looking at potential jail time, and that's just the beginning." Within hours, the counterattack revealed its devastating scope. District Attorney Richard Sterling, who owed his position partly to Big Bob's campaign contributions, announced he was seeking the maximum penalty for Mike's unprovoked attack on an innocent teenager. The media narrative began shifting as Big Bob's public relations team went to work. Planted stories appeared questioning Mike's mental stability, his history of violence, and his motives for involving himself in local affairs. Social media bots spread negative hashtags. Hashtag Tyson Thugs, hashtag Celebrity Bully, hashtag Violent has been. But the most crushing blow came at Carol's workplace. Hospital administrator Dr. Kenneth Phillips called her into his office with obvious discomfort. "Carol, I'm sorry to inform you that due to budget constraints, your position is being eliminated effective immediately." Carol stared at him in disbelief. "Budget constraints? I've worked here for 8 years. My performance reviews are exemplary." Dr. Phillips couldn't meet her eyes. "The decision comes from the board of directors. It's final." What Carol didn't know was that Big Bob's construction company had contracts throughout the region, and he'd made strategic phone calls to business associates and political allies. The message was clear. Anyone employed by someone who crossed Big Bob Brennan would face consequences. Other employers in the area received similar warnings. Carol's nursing skills were excellent, but suddenly no one was hiring. Applications that should have resulted in immediate interviews were rejected without explanation. The economic warfare extended beyond Carol. Businesses that had expressed support for Danny found their permits delayed, their inspections more rigorous, their relationships with city services mysteriously complicated. Mike watched the systematic destruction with growing anger. His own legal troubles paled compared to what was happening to the Castellano family. "This is what corruption looks like when it fights back," he told Linda during an emergency meeting. "It gets worse," Linda replied. "Sterling is pursuing felony charges that could mean serious prison time. Big Bob's using his influence to paint you as an unstable ex-convict who preys on children." Mike's phone buzzed with constant notifications as negative stories spread across social media. Pictures from his troubled past were resurfaced and shared out of context. His prior convictions were highlighted while his years of positive community work were ignored. "They're trying to destroy my reputation to discredit everything we've accomplished," Mike realized. The smear campaign was professionally orchestrated. Big Bob's team planted stories about Mike's pattern of violence, his inability to control his temper, and his exploitation of a disabled child for publicity. Even some of Danny's supporters began expressing doubts. Comments appeared on social media questioning whether Mike had manipulated a vulnerable teenager for his own agenda. Carol came home from her final day at work devastated and frightened. They fired me, Danny. After 8 years, they just fired me. Danny realized with growing horror that his family was being systematically destroyed because he dared to fight back against injustice. The weight of responsibility crushed down on him as he watched his mother struggle not to cry. Mike arrived that evening to find the Castellano household in crisis. The victory celebration of just days before seemed like a lifetime ago. "Maybe you should just let it go, Mr. Tyson," Danny said quietly. "Look what we've done to my mom. They're too powerful. We can't win." Mike stared at the broken family he'd tried to help, realizing his intervention had made their lives immeasurably worse. The stress reached its breaking point the next morning when Danny collapsed at school. Carol received the terrifying phone call every parent dreads. "Mrs. Castellano, your son is being transported to Regional Medical Center. He's had some kind of seizure." Carol raced to the hospital, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Without health insurance from her job, she couldn't afford whatever treatment Danny might need. The financial nightmare was becoming a medical crisis. Dr. Sarah Martinez, no relation to Linda, met Carol in the emergency room with serious news. Danny's had a stress-induced neurological episode related to his spina bifida. The extreme emotional and physical stress has triggered complications we haven't seen before. Danny lay in the hospital bed, connected to monitoring equipment that beeped ominously. Despite the medical equipment surrounding him, his eyes were alert and filled with guilt. "Mom," he whispered when Carol took his hand, "I'm sorry. This is all my fault." Carol fought back tears. The medical bills were already mounting, and without insurance, the cost would bankrupt them completely. Their modest savings wouldn't cover even a fraction of the specialized care Danny needed. Mike arrived within an hour, his face grim as he took in the scene. The kid who'd shown such courage just days before looked small and fragile in the hospital bed. "How much?" Mike asked Carol quietly. "The initial treatment will be at least $20,000, she replied, her voice breaking. "And that's just the beginning. If he needs surgery." Mike felt the weight of his failure crushing down on him. His attempt to help had resulted in a sick kid in the hospital, a good woman losing her livelihood, and a family facing financial ruin. "Maybe you should just let it go, Mr. Tyson," Danny said weakly, echoing his words from the night before. "They're too powerful. Look what I've done to my mom." Mike sat beside the hospital bed, staring at the monitors that tracked Danny's vital signs. This was his darkest moment, not because of what might happen to him legally, but because of what had happened to the people he'd tried to protect. Outside the hospital room, Carol broke down completely in the hallway. "I can't afford this," she sobbed to Linda Martinez, who had come to provide support. "I lost my job, I can't find another one, and now Danny needs treatment we can't pay for." The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. The federal accessibility funds that should have prevented Danny's initial injury had been stolen by the same man now systematically destroying their lives for fighting back. Linda tried to offer legal comfort, but the reality was stark. Even if they won their lawsuits eventually, the Castellanos needed help now. Legal victories meant nothing if Danny didn't get the medical care he needed. News of Danny's hospitalization leaked to the media, but Big Bob's public relations machine quickly spun it as evidence that Mike's involvement had been harmful to the family. Social media filled with comments about exploitation and putting a vulnerable teenager at risk. Mike stood in the hospital corridor, watching Carol cry and seeing Danny's life hanging in the balance because he'd tried to help. For the first time since this began, he seriously considered backing down. Then Danny's weak voice called from the hospital bed. "Mr. Tyson? My dad died when I was 8. He told me before he died that the only time you really lose is when you stop fighting for what's right." Mike's hands clenched into fists as Danny's words hit home. The kid was right. His father was right. Backing down now wouldn't save Danny. It would just prove that corruption and power could crush anyone who dared to resist. That Mike's eyes hardened with renewed determination. Big Bob Brennan had made this personal, and that was a mistake he would regret. Mike stood up from Danny's bedside, his jaw set with the kind of determination that had once terrorized heavyweight contenders. "You're right, Danny. And your dad was a smart man. We're not done yet. Not by a long shot." Within an hour, Mike was making phone calls with the intensity of a general mobilizing for war. His first call went to Floyd Mayweather. "Floyd, it's Mike. I need a favor. Big one." Anything for you, champ. What's the situation? Kid in a wheelchair got attacked for standing up to bullies. Now they're trying to destroy his family financially. I need to raise some serious money, fast. Say no more. I'll co-host whatever you need. The calls continued. Evander Holyfield agreed to provide financial backing. Joe Rogan offered his podcast platform for a special episode dedicated to Danny's cause. Dana White promised UFC would donate proceeds from their next Philadelphia event. This is war now, Mike told Linda Martinez during an emergency strategy session. Big Bob wants to play hardball? Fine. But he's about to learn that I got friends he can't buy and influence he can't match. Mike's plan was comprehensive and ruthless. First, a massive fundraiser to handle Danny's medical bills and Carol's financial crisis. Second, a legal defense fund staffed by the country's top civil rights attorneys. Third, bringing in Diana Crawford, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist whose reputation made sources talk who wouldn't speak to anyone else. Diana's got a reputation for exposing corruption that goes back 30 years, Mike explained to Carol and Danny. When she starts digging, powerful people start sweating. The boxing community rallied with stunning speed. Mike's reputation for loyalty meant that when he called for help, legends answered. Within 24 hours, a star-studded fundraiser was scheduled for the weekend. You sure about this? Linda asked. Once we escalate to this level, there's no backing down. Big Bob will come at us with everything he has. Mike's smile was cold and determined. Good. I've been waiting my whole life for a fight this important. Celebrity endorsements poured in on social media. The story shifted from local news to national movement as Hollywood actors, professional athletes, and political figures expressed support for Danny's cause. Mike addressed a growing crowd of supporters outside the hospital. Some people think power comes from money or position or the ability to hurt others. But real power comes from standing up when it would be easier to sit down. We're going to show them what real power looks like. Carol watched in amazement as resources materialized seemingly from thin air. I can't believe all these people care about Danny. They don't just care about Danny, Mike replied. They care about what he represents. The idea that courage still matters, that truth still has power, and that bullies can't win if good people stand together. Danny's medical bills were covered within hours. Carol's mortgage was saved, and a scholarship fund was established for other disabled students facing similar challenges. But Mike knew the real battle was just beginning. Big Bob Brennan wouldn't surrender his empire without a fight. Diana Crawford arrived like a force of nature, setting up her investigation headquarters in a rented office space with the efficiency of someone who'd exposed corruption in 3 different decades. Her team of researchers and fact-checkers worked around the clock, following money trails that Big Bob thought he'd buried forever. I've been investigating white-collar corruption for 30 years, Diana told Mike as they reviewed preliminary findings. But this case has everything: fraud, discrimination, conspiracy, and a cover-up that goes straight to the top. Her reputation opened doors that had been slammed shut for other investigators. Sources who'd been too intimidated to speak before now came forward with devastating evidence. Former employees of Big Bob's construction company provided documentation of systematic fraud dating back over a decade. It's not just overcharging, Diana explained to the legal team. It's organized theft on a massive scale. He's been stealing federal accessibility funds, minority contractor set-asides, and education improvement grants. The bombshell discovery came when Diana's team found the original federal accessibility improvement contracts. The broken pavement that had caused Danny's wheelchair to get stuck should have been repaired 2 years earlier with a $50,000 federal grant specifically designated for disability accommodations. This is perfect, Linda Martinez said, studying the documents. Danny wasn't just attacked by bullies. He was victimized by a system that took money meant to help disabled students and put it in Big Bob's pocket. The irony was devastating and perfect for their case. Big Bob had literally profited from creating the conditions that led to Danny's injury, then tried to destroy the family when they fought back. Diana's investigation revealed corruption far beyond what anyone had suspected. Big Bob's empire had tentacles throughout the region: construction contracts, political influence, and a network of officials who owed their positions to his support. School board members, city councilmen, county commissioners, Diana listed. He's been buying influence for decades, and they all know where their bread is buttered. The financial trail led to overseas accounts, shell companies, and laundered money that painted a picture of systematic theft from public projects. Federal accessibility funds weren't the only money being stolen. Big Bob had been pillaging education, budgets, infrastructure grants, and social services funding. The total is probably in the tens of millions, Diana's forensic accountant reported. And that's just what we can prove so far. Mike's celebrity fundraiser exceeded all expectations, raising over $300,000 in one evening. Danny's medical bills were covered, Carol's financial crisis was resolved, and there was enough left over to establish a permanent scholarship fund for disabled students. More importantly, the media attention gave Diana's investigation a national platform. Her preliminary findings were broadcast on 60 Minutes, published in the Washington Post, and shared across social media platforms. The FBI, which had been moving slowly on their initial investigation, suddenly found themselves under intense public scrutiny. Federal agents who'd been taking their time were now working overtime as congressional oversight committees began asking pointed questions. The federal response is accelerating rapidly, Linda reported. Diana's work has given them everything they need to move forward with serious charges. Carol found her voice, agreeing to speak publicly about the corruption's impact on families like hers. "I've been quiet for too long," she told a national television audience. "Watching my son face barriers that should have been removed with federal money that was stolen instead." But Diana's warning proved prophetic. "We've got him cornered now," she told Mike. "But you need to know, desperate men do dangerous things. Big Bob's empire is crumbling, and he knows it." Diana's expose hit like an earthquake. The Washington Post published her investigation as a front-page story with the headline, "Systematic Theft of Federal Funds Targets Disabled Students." 60 Minutes followed with a devastating segment that included hidden camera footage of Big Bob's associates discussing the fraud. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Decades of financial records, witness testimony, and documented cover-ups painted a picture of corruption so extensive that federal prosecutors had no choice but to act decisively. FBI raids began at dawn. Agents simultaneously hit Big Bob's offices, Morrison's home, and several school board members' properties. Federal investigators seized computers, financial records, and communication devices that contained years of incriminating evidence. The Attorney General announced federal charges were forthcoming, citing violations of civil rights laws, federal fraud statutes, and conspiracy charges that could result in decades of prison time. This investigation reveals a systematic effort to defraud federal programs designed to help our most vulnerable citizens, the Attorney General said during a nationally televised press conference. Those responsible will face the full force of federal prosecution. Big Bob watched his empire collapse from his office, surrounded by federal agents boxing up evidence. His face was purple with rage as decades of carefully constructed corruption crumbled around him. "This is all because of that damn boxer," he muttered to his attorney. "None of this would have happened if he'd minded his own business." The financial markets responded immediately. Big Bob's construction company's stock plummeted as federal contracts were suspended and pending projects were put under review. Banks began calling in loans as the company's assets were frozen pending investigation. Political allies who'd benefited from Big Bob's influence began distancing themselves with the speed of rats fleeing a sinking ship. Campaign contributions were returned, endorsements were withdrawn, and longtime associates suddenly had no memory of their relationships with the disgraced businessman. District Attorney Sterling, faced with federal scrutiny of his own conduct, quietly dropped all charges against Mike. The announcement was buried in other news, but Mike was officially cleared of any wrongdoing. Danny, recovering well in the hospital, made a crucial connection while reading old school board minutes that Melissa had provided. "Mr. Tyson," he said excitedly when Mike visited, "look at this. The accessibility funds weren't just stolen, they were specifically diverted from projects that would have prevented my injury." The revelation transformed Danny from victim to crusader. He realized his story wasn't just about bullying, it was about systemic corruption that deliberately hurt the most vulnerable people in society for profit. Big Bob didn't just fail to help disabled students, Danny said, his voice strong with purpose. He actively made our lives worse so he could steal. Money meant to help us. The media coverage intensified as Danny's story became a symbol of institutional corruption and corporate greed. Congressional hearings were announced, federal oversight was expanded, and new legislation was proposed to strengthen protections for accessibility funding. But Big Bob, facing potential life in prison and the complete destruction of everything he'd built, decided that desperate times called for desperate measures. In a meeting with Vincent "Vinny" DeLuca, a known associate with connections to violence and intimidation, Big Bob made a decision that would seal his fate. "The boxer started this," Big Bob said, his voice cold with desperation. "And he's going to finish it." Unknown to Big Bob, Detective Ricci had been monitoring his activities since the FBI raids. The honest cop who'd been forced to arrest Mike was now secretly gathering evidence to ensure justice was served. As Mike left the hospital that evening, he had no idea that 3 men were waiting in the parking garage, or that his greatest test was yet to come. Mike reached his Escalade in the hospital parking garage's lower level as the sun set outside. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows between the concrete pillars, and his footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. Behind him, footsteps matched his pace. Mike's street instincts, honed by decades of dangerous situations, told him he wasn't alone. He continued walking normally, but his muscles tensed with anticipation. "You should have minded your own business, you washed-up has-been." Mike turned slowly to face Big Bob Brennan, flanked by 3 men who clearly weren't construction workers. Vincent "Vinny" DeLuca stood to Big Bob's right, compact, dangerous, with the cold eyes of someone who'd hurt people for money. 2 larger men flanked them, professional muscle hired for intimidation and violence. "Mr. Brennan," Mike said calmly, his voice carrying no surprise. "Fancy meeting you here." Big Bob's face was twisted with rage and desperation. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he was a broken man watching his empire crumble. "You destroyed my life. 30 years building what I had, and you took it all away for some crippled kid who should have minded his own business." "I didn't destroy your life," Mike replied, his voice steady and controlled. "I just turned on the lights so everyone could see what you really are." "Shut up." Big Bob's composure shattered completely. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a washed-up convict who got lucky in the ring. Well, your luck just ran out." The muscle stepped forward, and Mike recognized the type. Immediately, ex-cons who'd graduated from prison yards to professional violence. They were bigger than him, younger, and they moved with the confidence of men who'd hurt people before. "You think strength is about making people afraid of you," Mike said, his voice calm despite the approaching danger. "Real strength is about making people feel safe around you. But you never learned that lesson." Vinny pulled a knife, its blade catching the harsh garage lights. "Enough talking. Boss wants this finished." Mike smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Funny thing about real fighters, we get better under pressure." The first attacker rushed forward, swinging a crowbar in a wide arc. Mike stepped inside the swing, grabbed the man's wrist, and delivered a precision uppercut that lifted him off his feet before dropping him unconscious to the concrete. The second man came more cautiously, but Mike was already moving. A feint to the left, a step to the right, and a perfectly timed body shot folded the attacker in half. He hit the ground gasping, unable to continue. Vinny approached with the knife, weaving the blade in practiced patterns. "I heard you were good, old man. Let's see if the legend lives up to the hype." Mike's response was a masterclass in defensive fighting. He slipped Vinny's knife thrusts with minimal movement, staying just out of range while wearing down his opponent's stamina. When Vinny overcommit on a wild slash, Mike trapped his knife arm and delivered a combination that ended the fight definitively. Big Bob, seeing his hired muscle defeated, pulled a gun with shaking hands. "If I can't have my life back, you're not walking away from this." "Bob," Mike said quietly, "put the gun down. This doesn't have to end with someone dying." "Yes, it does." Big Bob's finger tightened on the trigger. "You ruined everything." Mike moved with the speed that had made him legendary. A lightning-fast combination, feint, duck under the gun arm, uppercut that lifted Big Bob off his feet, and the weapon clattered across the concrete as Big Bob collapsed unconscious. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Detective Ricci, appeared from behind a pillar with backup officers, having monitored Big Bob's activities since the FBI raids. "We've been watching him since this morning," Ricci explained as paramedics checked the unconscious men. "We knew he'd try something desperate." Mike rubbed his knuckles, looking down at Big Bob's unconscious form. Some people never learn that the only way to truly lose is to stop fighting for what's right. As Big Bob was loaded into an ambulance, under arrest, Mike realized the real fight was finally over. Detective Ricci helped Mike to his feet as other officers secured the scene. "We've been monitoring Big Bob's communications since the FBI raid," Ricci explained. "When we heard him talking about eliminating the problem, we knew he'd make a move." The aftermath of the parking garage confrontation exploded across national media within hours. The image of Mike Tyson standing over a corrupt politician he'd just defeated became iconic, symbolizing the victory of principle over power and the triumph of individual courage over systematic corruption. Big Bob faced a cascade of charges: federal fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and now attempted assault with a deadly weapon. His attorney advised him that fighting the charges would likely result in life in prison. 3 weeks later, facing overwhelming evidence and his own recorded threats, Big Bob pleaded guilty to all federal charges. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison, ensuring he'd spend his remaining productive years behind bars. Principal Morrison was terminated immediately, facing his own criminal charges for his role in the cover-up. The school board voted unanimously to hire Dr. Angela Torres, a reformist educator with a track record of fighting discrimination and implementing genuine inclusion policies. Mrs. Patricia Kowalski was not only reinstated but promoted to assistant principal, tasked with overseeing the implementation of real anti-bullying programs and accessibility improvements. Her first act was ensuring that every dollar of federal accessibility funding was properly tracked and implemented. Carol found a position at Philadelphia General Hospital, where her advocacy skills and experience made her invaluable as a patient advocate. The hospital specifically recruited her because of her demonstrated ability to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Danny's recovery exceeded all medical expectations. The stress-induced complications resolved completely, and his college applications weren't just restored. Universities were competing to recruit him after seeing his national profile. The most surprising transformation came from Chad Brennan. His community service working with disabled children had genuinely changed him. The experience of helping rather than hurting, of using his strength to lift others up instead of tearing them down, awakened something in him that his father's corruption had nearly destroyed. "I want to apologize," Chad said publicly during a school assembly. "Not just to Danny, but to every person I hurt through my actions or my silence. I spent years thinking strength meant making people fear me. Danny and Mr. Tyson showed me that real strength means protecting people." Chad announced he was starting a nonprofit organization focused on teaching conflict resolution and empathy to young athletes. His transformation from bully to advocate became a powerful example of genuine redemption. The legal precedent established by Danny's case led to federal legislation strengthening oversight of accessibility funding and creating new penalties for institutional discrimination. The Castellano Act became law 6 months later. Mike visited Danny one final time before the teenager left for Colombia. "You did something special here, champ. You didn't just get justice for yourself, you changed the whole system." Danny smiled, his confidence fully restored. "We did it together. That's what real champions do." 6 months later, Mike stood in Riverside High's transformed gymnasium, looking around at changes that went far beyond fresh paint and new accessibility equipment. The culture itself had been revolutionized. Students moved through hallways with mutual respect, teachers engaged with genuine enthusiasm, and the toxic atmosphere of fear and intimidation had been replaced by one of inclusion and support. The ceremony was packed with students, parents, community leaders, and media representatives who'd come to witness what had become known as the Riverside Miracle. Danny sat at the head table beside Dr. Torres, looking confident and healthy in his Columbia University sweatshirt. "Ladies and gentlemen," Danny announced from the podium, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to use words as weapons for justice. "I'm honored to announce the establishment of the Champions of Justice Scholarship Fund." The fund supported by donations that had continued pouring in long after the initial crisis, would provide full college scholarships for disabled students pursuing careers in journalism, law, and advocacy. The goal was ensuring that other young people facing discrimination would have the resources to fight back. The first scholarship recipient, Danny continued, is Marcus Williams, who showed incredible courage in coming forward about his own experiences with bullying. Marcus wheeled onto the stage to thunderous applause, his smile radiant as he accepted the scholarship that would fund his studies in social work. The young man who'd been hospitalized by Chad's previous attack was now empowered to help other victims find their voices. In a moment that stunned everyone present, Chad approached the microphone. His transformation over the past months had been remarkable. The arrogant bully had become a thoughtful young man, genuinely committed to making amends. "I want to say something that's been weighing on me," Chad said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his words. "I hurt people because I was hurt. I was angry because my father taught me that power meant making others afraid. But Danny and Mr. Tyson taught me something different. That real power means lifting people up." He announced that his nonprofit organization, Second Chances for Athletes, had already begun working with high school sports programs throughout Pennsylvania, teaching conflict resolution and empathy to young competitors. Mike took the stage to deliver the keynote address, but his speech focused not on his own actions, but on the real heroes. Danny for having the courage to speak truth to power, Carol for never giving up on her son, Mrs. Kowalski for risking her career to do what was right. "Real champions don't just win for themselves," Mike said, his voice carrying across the silent gymnasium. "They fight for people who can't fight for themselves. They use their strength to protect, not to harm. And they never give up on the idea that justice is possible." The ceremony became a celebration of transformation. Representatives from other school districts attended to learn from Riverside's success. The Department of Education sent officials to study the reforms for potential national implementation. Local businesses that had once been intimidated by Big Bob's influence now openly supported inclusion initiatives. The entire community had been transformed by witnessing what could happen when ordinary people found extraordinary courage. As the formal program concluded, Mike and Danny sat quietly in the empty gymnasium, reflecting on their journey from the worst day of Danny's life to this moment of celebration and hope. "You know what I learned from all this?" Danny asked. "What's that, champ?" "Heroes aren't the people who never get knocked down. Heroes are the people who get back up and help others do the same." 1 year after the attack, Mike opened his phone to see a photo that made him smile. Danny wearing a Columbia University School of Journalism t-shirt, standing proudly beside the campus statue with Carol beaming next to him. Danny was thriving at Columbia, where his story had made him a celebrity among future journalists studying investigative reporting and advocacy. His freshman year articles about accessibility in higher education had already won National Student Journalism Awards. Carol's transformation was equally remarkable. As chief patient advocate at Philadelphia General, she'd become a regional leader in healthcare advocacy, frequently speaking at conferences about fighting institutional discrimination. Her experience battling systems for Danny's rights had prepared her to help countless other families navigate similar challenges. The institutional changes at Riverside High had become a national model. Dr. Torres had implemented comprehensive anti-bullying programs, genuine accessibility improvements, and transparent financial oversight that other districts studied and replicated. Test scores had improved dramatically as fear-based culture was replaced with supportive learning environment. Mrs. Kowalski's mentorship program had virtually eliminated bullying incidents by connecting older students with younger ones facing challenges. Her innovation was being adopted by school districts across the country. Chad's redemption had continued to surprise everyone. His nonprofit had expanded to work with youth sports programs in 12 states, and his personal transformation from bully to advocate had become a case study in genuine behavioral change. He'd earned a scholarship to study social work and continued his advocacy work. The legal legacy of Danny's case had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The federal legislation inspired by their fight had strengthened oversight of accessibility funding nationwide and created new penalties for institutional discrimination against disabled students. Mike's Real Champions Foundation had become a powerful force for anti-bullying education and inclusion advocacy, helping change policies in hundreds of school districts and preventing countless incidents of discrimination. The foundation's work had expanded internationally, bringing anti-bullying programs to schools around the world. Diana Crawford's Pulitzer Prize for her investigation into Big Bob's corruption had elevated the story to iconic status in journalism. Schools. Her work had inspired a new generation of investigative reporters to focus on institutional corruption that hurt vulnerable populations. The financial recovery had exceeded all expectations. Federal investigations had recovered millions of dollars in stolen accessibility funds, money that was now being used properly to help disabled students throughout the region. Danny received the Young Advocate of the Year award from the National Disability Rights Organization, with Mike there to present it to him. Their partnership had become legendary in advocacy circles. The boxing champion and the teenage journalist who'd taken on corruption and won. 5 years ago, I was just trying to survive high school, Danny told the audience during his acceptance speech. I never imagined that standing up to bullies would lead to changing laws and helping thousands of other students. Mike watched, with pride, as the young man he'd first met bleeding in a wheelchair had become a national voice for justice and inclusion. The ripple effects continued spreading. Other communities began investigating their own school districts and construction contractors. Federal oversight was strengthened. Most importantly, disabled students across the country were empowered to speak up about discrimination, knowing that their voices would be heard. 5 years after the incident that changed everything, Danny wheeled across the stage at Columbia University's graduation ceremony to receive his master's degree in investigative journalism. Mike sat in the audience beside Carol, Mrs. Kowalski, and surprisingly, Chad, who had maintained his friendship with Danny and his commitment to advocacy work throughout college. Danny had been hired by the Washington Post immediately upon graduation, where his investigative series on institutional discrimination had won a Pulitzer Prize for public service journalism. At 23, he'd become one of the youngest recipients in the award's history. His acceptance speech had focused on the power of unlikely alliances and how one moment of courage could create ripple effects lasting for years. 5 years ago, I thought I was just standing up to school bullies, he'd said. I never imagined it would lead to federal legislation, institutional reform, and a career dedicated to fighting injustice. The ceremony included the announcement of Columbia's newest endowment, the Daniel Castellano Fellowship for Investigative Journalism and Social Justice, funded by donations from the boxing community, advocacy organizations, and supporters who'd followed their story for years. Mike was invited to speak at the reception, but his remarks focused on how Danny had taught him that the most important victories weren't won in boxing rings, but in the quiet moments when someone chose to stand up for what was right. People ask me about my greatest fights, Mike said to the gathered crowd of graduates, faculty, and families. They want to hear about championship bouts and famous opponents. But my greatest fight wasn't against another boxer. It was standing beside a young man who refused to be silenced by bullies and corruption. The personal relationships had grown stronger over the years. Carol had become like family to Mike, and their shared experience had created bonds that transcended the original crisis. Mike had walked Carol down the aisle when she remarried a fellow advocate she'd met at a patient rights conference. Danny's engagement to Melissa Rodriguez had been announced in the Post-Society pages. She'd become a civil rights attorney specializing in educational law, inspired by their shared fight against institutional discrimination. Their wedding was planned for the following year. The professional impact continued expanding. The Real Champions Foundation had become an international organization, working with schools in 15 countries. Mike's model of celebrity advocacy had inspired other athletes and entertainers to use their platforms for systematic change rather than just charity. Chad's transformation remained one of the story's most powerful elements. His nonprofit had prevented dozens of potential bullying incidents and helped hundreds of young athletes understand the difference between competition and cruelty. His friendship with Danny had become a symbol of genuine redemption and the possibility of change. As the graduation ceremony concluded, Mike and Danny found themselves alone in the emptying auditorium, just as they'd sat together in Riverside High's gymnasium years earlier. You know what's funny? Danny said, adjusting his graduation cap. I spent so long wanting to be taken seriously as a journalist. I never realized that my biggest story would be my own life. Mike smiled, remembering the scared teenager he'd met in a nurse's office 5 years before. You were already a champion then, kid. You just needed someone to ring the bell so everyone else could hear it. Danny reached out to shake Mike's hand, but the older man pulled him into a hug instead. Thank you for believing in me when nobody else would. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like, Mike replied. You changed my life as much as I changed yours. As they left the auditorium together, the legendary boxer and the award-winning journalist, they carried with them the satisfaction of knowing they'd made the world a little more just, one fight at a time. The story of their unlikely partnership had become more than just a tale of justice prevailing over corruption. It had become proof that real champions aren't defined by the fights they win, but by the people they lift up along the way. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.